welcome to the first pre-scene analysis video for Trimayr, the company that is the subject of the pre-scene material for the May 2025 and August 2025 MCS exam. So over the next few videos, we're going to be looking through the pre-scene and we're going to be thinking about what we are reading about Trimayr and the hairdressing industry. And we're going to be considering what areas of E2, F2 and P2 could be tested in the exam and how those could be tested in relation to our hairdressing company. Now, before we actually start to look at the first page or so of the pre-scene, let's just think why we need to read the pre-scene and become familiar with it. What is the point of doing that? And there are a number of reasons for us going through the pre-scene in these videos, and also for you to then reread the pre-scene, think about it yourself, and become more and more familiar with the content of this pre-scene. So firstly, why are we reading the pre-scene? Well, we're going to be asked in the exam to apply our knowledge of various topics in E2, P2 and F2 to this company. We're not being tested on the theory of those papers. And therefore, what we need to do is to make sure that we really understand this organisation. Because in reality, as a finance manager, in our role, we're going to be asked for advice, but it's in relation to the company that we work at. We're never going to be asked in our role in a company to produce some theoretical answer to a question. It's always about the company that we work in. So now Trimayr is where we work, and we need to be able to understand it well enough, be comfortable with it, that when we're asked a question in the exam, we can understand the implications of that to Trimayr. We can see the advantages and disadvantages to Trimayr, or the problems or the issues, or the people who could lead a project. We understand it well enough to be able to suggest really good applied answers that in real life would be good solutions for Trimayr. So, application of our knowledge requires a good understanding of the company where we work. That's Trimayr. Now, another reason for reading the pre-scene carefully and thinking about it is to anticipate possible scenarios in the exam. So the information we have from the pre-scene is as Trimayr is now, but on your exam day, Trimayr will have decided to do something, or something will have happened to it. And we need to try to think about what those kind of scenarios could be. So if we read this pre-scene and we think about what we're reading, and also if we think about the real life industry, and we have a video that will go through some industry analysis, it will help us to anticipate what kind of scenarios could come up in the exam. And then on exam day, we won't be so surprised. We might even have already considered a particular question or a particular scenario that's presented to us. Now, another reason to really study the pre-scene is to give you confidence, because in a case study exam, you're going to have to suggest points and argue them, support them with reasoning. It's a lot easier to do that successfully if you are actually confident that you understand Trimayr. You've thought about it a lot. You've thought about different scenarios and you do feel confident. Your answer will be much better if you are confident in what you're saying. And confidence comes from familiarity with this pre-scene and with all of the ideas that we will have had when going through these videos. Now, there are going to be a number of videos. This is the first one. And what I suggest that you should do is when you've gone through a video, perhaps replay it, pause it, read something again yourself. Think about it. It will not be sufficient just to read this pre-scene once and to go through the videos once. You do need time yourself to reread parts of this pre-scene and have your own thoughts as well. Okay then. So those are the reasons we are going to look through this pre-scene. We're going to try to get really enthusiastic about it. We're going to aim to feel like we work there and to feel like we're a financial manager who could give good, relevant advice. So let's move on and look at the very first part of this pre-scene. So here we are at the introduction. And although this is just a small introduction, there are some really important points here. And highlighted in yellow are a number of points that I've just highlighted to pull out things that we could think about. So first of all, Trimayr franchises hairdressing salons. So the first point, of course, is we've got a chain of hairdressing salons. And interesting point I would say just about that is this is a service industry. It's not a manufacturing company. And a service industry, of course, relies on consistency of service, quality of service, the skills of the staff. So we need to immediately think about this company as a service industry because it'll highlight to us what is really important in this type of organization. Now, I've highlighted that word franchises because it's important for us to understand how Trimayr operates. Now, it franchises hairdressing salons, but it also, as I've highlighted, owns some. So it's got a mixture of its own salons where Trimayr has full control of what's going on in those salons, make all the decisions in those salons, and hairdressing salons that are franchised. Now, the franchisee, of course, will have some control of decision making. But Trimayr, as the franchisor, will also have some control. And it's important for us to understand for Trimayr, what does the franchisor Trimayr actually control and decide about the franchise salons? And what does the owner of the franchise actually control and decide? That's important to understand what's controllable by whom. If we were thinking about performance measurement, we would, I think, consider the fact that we should have different KPIs for the franchised salons and the owned salons because the decision making for those two types isn't done the same way by the same people. So a bit of a complication in this pre-scene in that we've got a combination of units, fully controlled by Trimayr and not fully controlled because there are franchisees who own those salons. Now, that means we need to consider the differences really and start thinking about the differences between the owned salons and the franchise ones. So there'll be different revenue streams because, of course, the franchisees will be charged some form of a royalty fee. Now, that is normally based on revenue, but in many companies that do franchise, not necessarily in the hairdressing industry, but others, royalty fees could be established based on different measures. There could be a fixed element, there could be a variable element based on revenues. And it's important for us to understand that the franchise salons will generate some form of royalty fee, and we'll find out later how that is actually based, what its criteria is. And the owned salons, of course, well, if we own those, we're going to be concerned about revenue, of course, but we're going to be concerned about profitability of those salons. Whereas for the franchise salons, if our royalty is coming from the revenue, perhaps we're less bothered about the profitability of those salons because we get our royalty fee based on revenue. So different measures, you see, for those different types of salons. Now, the risks of each type are going to be different. Of course, if we think about a franchise salon, well, that franchisee does make its own decisions about some aspects of the operations of that salon, and that presents more risk to Trimayr because those franchisees, those owners of those businesses, could make decisions that are not in the best interest of Trimayr. So risks, I think, are going to be very important, key too, to think about, particularly, but not only, to do with the franchise salons. Now, thinking again about that side of the business, how does Trimayr control the franchisees? How do they make sure that those businesses are operating as Trimayr wants them to be operated? And it's going to be important for Trimayr to have good performance measurement and good performance management of those salons. Even even though Trimayr doesn't own them, of course, to maximize that revenue to Trimayr, there must be good performance measurement and management. So thinking about performance measurement systems, we're going to be doing that later on during the course of our analysis. Now, just mentioning the fact that some decisions will be made by Trimayr, some will be made by the franchisee. Of course, there could well be conflict arising between those two parties. And the majority of Trimayr's salons are franchised. So, potential scenario in the exam, testing us on E2 conflict management. What if a large number of the franchisees together get together and demand changes in the agreement that they have with Trimayr, changes in the royalty fee structure, or just changes in who makes decisions? Remember, in E2, we talk about authority, we talk about delegation. Well, perhaps the owners of the franchised salons would like more decision making. So there's going to be some conflict. They are demanding a delegation of authority in certain areas to them. How would Trimayr manage that conflict? What do you know about appropriate techniques for conflict management that you could suggest in an exam scenario? Now, it also points out that Trimayr is based in Dasland and it has salons throughout Dasland. By implication, what that means is it is only present in Dasland, and that is typical of the pre-scenes that we have seen in recent years and recent exam sessions. But what it leads to the possibility of is overseas expansion. And if in Dasland, Trimayr is struggling to see where growth could come from, it's possible they could consider expanding, perhaps into the neighbouring country by acquisition. So now think F2. What do you remember about groups and accounting for subsidiaries? Or perhaps Trimayr would expand organically by finding a suitable city location in a neighbouring country, by finding a potential salon location, and by then recruiting staff, training them, and opening its first overseas salon. Both of those are possibilities in the exam, which could then test you on a number of E2, P2, and F2 syllabus areas. For example, accounting for a subsidiary, describing in the exam how the acquisition of a chain of salons in a different country would be accounted for, how goodwill would be calculated, for example. What about evaluating the potential risks of this overseas move and making suggestions for the management of those risks? What about E2 setting up a project to go and find a good location for an overseas salon and to actually source that location, recruit staff, train them, and open the salon? Project management. What do you know about project management, the stages of it, how it should be controlled? What do you know about skills of a project manager? All things that could be tested. Okay, then. Now, if we just move down to the bottom of this page, it points out that we are the financial manager or a financial manager in Trimayr. And it's important for us to appreciate that that's relevant when it comes to the questions we will get in the exam. We will not be asked to suggest strategy. That is something that we would come to when we get to strategic case study. We're not at that level. We're not a board member, are we? We are a financial manager. So the company will decide on a strategy. We will be asked to assist through advice about risk of that strategy, or monitoring performance of that strategy, or ideas about how to manage the conflict that might arise, or how to account for that particular strategy. We are being asked for our advice in all those areas of E2, P2, and F2 that we should know. We're going to be asked for advice to help provide the board with more useful, relevant information as to what they could do and how they could manage in the medium term. So the typical financial manager role is about implementation of strategy. It's about that medium term focus. We are a finance manager, so we might have to advise about financing for a strategy, debt or equity. Yes, we might have to advise them about risks that we could foresee, accounting, and consideration of external factors, of course. So not suggesting strategy, but providing information to help the board to monitor, manage, and evaluate strategies that they are pursuing. Finally, I just wanted to point out to you some real world examples, because you're not going to be tested on the real world of hairdressing salons. But if you read a little about any hairdressing salon chains that you know about, it will just give you more confidence that you understand this industry in reality, and it gives you ideas. Because these companies that I've listed are all chains of hairdressers. And if you look at a little bit about them, you'll see that some differences between what these companies have done or are doing, what Trimayr currently does. And that again gives us ideas, doesn't it, for what could Trimayr do and what might we find that it has proposed to do in the exam. So I've listed 3 examples here, but these are not the only ones to look at. And if you're aware of a hairdressing chain that you have heard of, just do a little bit of research on it. Read something like a recent annual report, or go onto its website and find information and history about the company. Tony and Guy is a very good one, in that it is a very good example of a very large hairdressing chain across tens of countries. So it is not only located in one country, unlike Trimayr. It has grown through franchising. So another really important point. And when we read more about Trimayr, we understand that it has grown, or it grew initially through its innovation, its link with the media, its ability to influence fashion. And that is similar to Tony and Guy. The ability of these companies when they first established to actually influence fashion, to change people's ideas about fashion, to be pictured in magazines with big clothing brands as the hair-do that goes with this type of exclusive clothing brand. That is how many of these chains have grown. So the importance of the brand and the innovation and the fashion attached to it has actually helped grow many of these real life companies, just as when we read later about Trimayr, we see how it has also developed with those types of strengths being the drivers for its growth. In our industry analysis, we'll have a little bit more of a look at Tony and Guy because it's a good example for us to delve into in more detail. Saks is a UK-based hair salon chain, again grew through franchising. The points that make this one a bit different and interesting is it now calls itself Saks Hair and Beauty, and it provides beauty services like for aesthetics, such as Botox and fillers. So that just makes me think, perhaps Trimayr in the exam has decided to go into the beauty business. Perhaps it's decided to change its 40 own salons into beauty salons rather than hair salons. Another couple of aspects of Saks that I think is interesting is that they did a tie-up with a national health club chain in the UK, and that was David Lloyd Health Clubs, if you're aware of them. And they are a prestigious chain in the UK of leisure clubs. And what Saks did was tied up with David Lloyd Health Clubs to have a Saks salon within each health club. Now, again, there is a possibility for Trimayr. Saks introduced an academy to train the staff and the franchisees, and it also took on apprentices and led an apprenticeship. And later on, we'll find that those are things that Trimayr has also done. Jean-Louis David is another good example because it was Europe's largest hairdressing chain. And it had grown through innovation and brand image and influence on fashion again. And it was acquired by Regis, which is also, although I've not noted it, a good company to have a look at. Regis was the largest US operator, and they decided to expand by acquiring Jean-Louis David to be able to grow in Europe. Again, an example of acquisition of another hairdressing chain, something that Trimayr could do as a route to growth. Regis, if you wanted to look at them as an example, they have got both franchised and owned salons. Very similar, therefore, to Trimayr. Regis has something like 4,000 salons. So that is 8 times the size of Trimayr. But it has grown through acquisition. Okay, then. So enough for us to have got our heads into Trimayr and to have set the scene. And we will move on in the next video to look at more about the hairdressing industry. Let's now look at the hairdressing industry as described to us in the pre-scene. So first of all, there are 52,000 hairdressing salons in Dasland. And later we see the main nationwide chains, the 6 chains, and we see how many salons they have between them. And what we then realise, as it says here, is that actually the vast majority of hairdressing salons are not chains of hairdressing salons. They are independently operated small businesses with perhaps 10 staff in each salon, individual, little, local, if you like, hairdressing salons. Some of them might have 2 or 3 salons located in nearby towns or cities, but many of them just have a single salon. And Then we have the 6 nationwide chains, 2 of which own and operate their salons, and 4 operate on a franchise basis. Now, if we think then about that competitive nature of this industry, I think it's important to realize that the local independent hair salons are able to target very much their small local customer base and really refine their offering to absolutely meet customer needs. With very specific targeting of just the population in the local area, these independent salons can really develop strong customer relationships and get to know the customers very well. They will probably, I think, have a not a very high staff turnover because the local industry, local hairdressers will probably want to stay local to where they work. And it's likely, I think, that there'll be a lower staff turnover in these local salons than in the chains. The local salons mustn't be ignored because these are key competitors for any of the national chains. And I think what the national chains have really got to do is to be able to develop those customer relationships and to meet the needs of their customer base just in the same way that the local independent salon can. But as a chain that operates across the whole country, that might be very difficult to actually do because you're making decisions across a whole chain of salons. And a decision that's good for one salon might not be right for another salon located elsewhere. So I'm thinking the challenge here, of course, for the chains is to really be able to build relationships, maintain customer loyalty, give a individual service just as well as all of these many tens of thousands of local hairdressing salons can do. Now, I've just noted there as well, just a reminder, that this is a service industry. And when we think about that, of course, there's some very big differences, aren't there, to bear in mind. If in a hair salon, there is a hairdresser who has an hour slot available for customer and no customer booked, that is lost revenue. We can't use that slot again. It's gone. If we manufacture goods, we can store them and sell them at a later date, but not for a service industry like this. So maximizing the use of your salon in terms of having all of your hairdressers used all of the time is going to be critical. Ensuring you have booking systems that enable customers to see availability at the last minute and quickly hop in and book that slot. Perhaps having promotion systems that can even trigger a message to a mobile of a customer to say, we have a slot in 2 hours if you want to use it. Those types of use of IT, booking systems, messaging systems, promoting the salon to maximize those revenues are going to be really important. Consistency of service is going to be important. If you get a hair cut done in a certain way 1 month, you're going to want it to be done the same way 2 months later. And you might not have the same hairdresser in the salon doing your hair. So consistency, training, vital aspects for these types of businesses. Now, if we just look then at the types of decisions the nationwide chains have got to consider, well, pricing strategies. If we think about local individual salons, they can pick whatever prices they want. In terms of a national chain, the brand image is very important. Is this brand market? Is it mid-market? Is it value for money? And the pricing has to go with that brand image. So we need to think about pricing strategies and who makes that pricing decision. Is it a franchisee or is it Trimayr, the franchisor? Does the franchisor give some guidance about pricing? And whatever decisions are made about pricing at the moment, Who makes those decisions? There could be a proposal in the exam for pricing to be done differently. Perhaps it's brought back into Trimayr head office. Cost control. Trimayr has 40 owned salons. Cost control to generate maximum profit is going to be vital. Trimayr has a head office. Again, cost control within those head office functions. Trimayr has an academy. So cost control techniques, cost transformation, perhaps activity-based costing, important activities for Trimayr. And we must always remember as well that the franchise salons, it might be less of a concern for Trimayr as to those individual salons' costs because Trimayr gets its royalty fee based on revenue. But of course, we could be asked in the exam about a particular franchisee and the 10 salons they own and about cost control measures that they could employ to improve the profitability of their franchise salons. Now, of course, Trimayr is the brand, and there will be a website. There needs to be consistency of branding. And if we're going to be appealing to our customers and attracting our customers, we need to make sure that we are supporting our brand with investment, with appropriate marketing, with social media. And we need to develop a website that not only supports our brand, but also enables that customer interaction to develop the strong customer relationship. We've already mentioned performance measurement of salons, thinking about those KPIs we might need. We've mentioned consistency of the quality of service and how we do that. The franchisees, of course, will have a contract with Trimayr, and those contracts will require negotiation. And when we come further into the pre-scene, we know that these contracts are done every 5 years. Negotiation skills. We might, as Trimayr head office, be about to renegotiate a significant contract with a franchisee who has perhaps 25 salons. We might be asked about how best to approach that negotiation. We need to understand about the process of negotiation, the stages of it, the ways to approach negotiation to ensure it's successful. We need to think about the contract and ensuring that we include everything in that contract that therefore will enable an effective relationship between Trimayr and the franchisee. And there's risks of not making a good contract. We are asked about risks in many exam questions. And one of the types of risk that has been tested in the past is contract inadequacy risk. What happens if you produce a contract that's not very good? So we could think about that, couldn't we, in relation to the contract with a franchisee. Now, hairdressing salons offer a range of services. And before we look at those, let's just remind ourselves that there's a lot of risks here in these salons. For example, I've just thought of some personal risks. The risk of inconsistent cutting, colouring, styling, the risk of doing that badly. And if we've got apprentices or college leavers who are currently being supervised, of course, that risk increases. What about chemical or heat damage to hair? What about customers then seeking compensation? We could think of F2 and accounting for provision, IAS 37, for compensation for a customer. We can think about the reputational risk, P2, of damaging hair. What about stockouts of products? So we're a service industry, but we do have products. We use products in the salon. The franchised and the owned salons use products. So we do have to have an inventory of products in the salon, each and every salon, but also the chain earns revenues from selling those products to customers who love the products used in the salon and they want to buy them so that at home they can have the same experience. Well, there's risks of stockouts. What would happen if one particular salon has poor inventory management and a number of customers go for their hair colouring appointment and their particular colour has run out. We can see how that could cause dissatisfaction of the customers. That could spread through word of mouth, through social media, and we might see a particular salon suffering from a fall in revenue. We might just limit our ability to maximize sales of products if we aren't good at stocking the products that customers actually buy. What kind of systems does Trimayr have for monitoring the sales of products and which ones should be stocked and which ones aren't really used very often and aren't bought very often, perhaps could be removed? Very interestingly, allergic reaction to products. We can often see in the media food allergies generating significant media coverage when, sadly, a customer eats a food that they're allergic to that was not properly identified as an ingredient and become very ill. I think exactly that situation could happen from the use of products in salon. Now, the products that Trimayr uses comes from manufacturers. There's a big need to make sure that Trimayr fully understands the products that they are sourcing. They understand what goes into those products. They understand that, and also that is communicated if there are any potential irritants to customers. And if we've ever been to a salon for a hair colour, we know that salons test the colour. They do a patch test 24 hours at least before you are going to have your hair coloured to make sure that you are not going to be allergic. We need to see that Trimayr does those types of risk management types of activities, because any of these types of risks, of course, lead to reputational damage. And, I think I've already said these chains in real life that we've mentioned, the Tony and Guys and the Saks, etc., they rely so much on their brand image driving customers to them. So reputational risks would be significant from many of these operational risks. A little point on the right is that there are lots of risks, I think, here we can see. I've just mentioned operational ones, but of course, we've also mentioned contract risks, etc. So there are lots of other types of risk. With so many risks, consider the use of a risk dashboard to help Trimayr to both manage and communicate these risks to its stakeholders. Right, now if we look at the range of services that the salons offer, we can see that there is a big range of services. So cutting and styling, men and women, from simple cuts to elaborate styles, washes, blow dries, straightening or curling during the blow drying process, professional styling for weddings or special occasions. It's a wide range of services. I think, that just reminds me that we need well-trained staff. And we need staff who can deliver what the customer actually asks for. So staff who can listen, can understand what's being asked for, can communicate well with that customer, and then can ensure that what they have asked for is what is delivered. Now, men and women will go into the salon. Cutting men's hair and styling it is different from cutting women's hair and styling it. And it's interesting to think about whether, if we were doing that, would we have different stylists? Because it's a different skill. The hair quality is different. The styling products are different. The cuts are different. So would we have different stylists who are trained up in the different characteristics of men versus women's hair? Would we have stylists who could do both? Would we have salons that cater for men and women? Or might we have separate salons, because we could then make the salons look and feel a way that perhaps men would prefer or women would prefer? When we read further into the pre-scene, Trimayr caters for both men and women within the salons. It's a possibility, isn't it, that they might decide that actually They would like to have some barbers shops, men only hairdressers, which can cater then specifically to the men who wish to go into there. Colouring and highlighting, of course, making sure that we can give the customer exactly the colour they want, specific to them. If it's just a small root colour, or is it the whole head? Is it highlights? Lots of technical skills required. Chemical treatments then, where we are trying to perhaps put in permanent waves and curls or permanently straighten hair. Of course, this then brings in again the risk of products, understanding those products, the skills that are needed. So the comments I've just made here are that there are a wide range of services being offered here, and more on the following page. Let's just finish off those, then I'll come back. So hair and scalp treatments. So adding in a scalp treatment after a wash that's perhaps charged at an extra £10, but that's going to perhaps improve hair health. Massaging the scalp whilst you're having your hair wash, which is really a hairdressing skill, is it? We're starting to move more into massage and beauty and relaxation offerings. And then possibly beard and moustache shaping, which are offered by some salons. Again, perhaps more of a specialist skill. So if we just go back to those comments that I was making, I just wanted to point out a few things like there are lots of services here, and it is important for the salon owners to understand the contribution each service makes. How often are these services demanded? How much are we selling them for? What actually is the cost of those services? What contribution do they actually make? For Trimayr's own salons, contribution is going to be important. For a franchisee, contribution is going to be important. For the franchisor, revenues from each of these services, if we're getting our royalty as a percentage of revenues, then revenues from these services are also going to be important. So having information systems, business information systems that can help us understand which of these services, from a perspective of revenues and contribution, are the ones that we could focus on. Perhaps some we could not deliver, and we could then move the resourcing onto other services. We could introduce new services, additional services like nail services or some beauty treatments. These services, I've already said, the customer will come back every, say, 8 weeks, 6 weeks. So quality of the service, quality of the products that are used, reputation of the products that are used are going to support the brand of these chains and the hairdressing salons. If we are using products in the salon that look like they are cheap and poor quality, that is not going to support the brand image of our salon. So when we think about franchised salons, it's going to be important to have control over what products a franchised salon is using. The owner of the franchise can't just choose their own products, because they could choose very cheap and cheerful products because they're focused on profits. Whereas, of course, the franchisor might want certain products to be used because they look and feel more quality, and that supports the whole brand of the hairdressing chain. So again, that conflict between the franchisee and the franchisor, and knowing what to delegate. And then once you've delegated, how to control and monitor and make sure the franchisee is adhering to the rules and regulations. Now, all of these services, of course, if we want to think about sustainability, well, actually, all of these services come with a high carbon footprint. There's a high water usage, of course, in salons. There's lots of plastic bottles with products in. We use foils when we're doing certain types of colour treatments. There are chemicals that are then disposed of that are harmful to the environment, such as hair dyes, which are washed off down into the water supply. There's lighting required for salons, good lighting, so that the hairstyle can be done under good lighting. All of those things point to high carbon footprint. And today, of course, with sustainability and environmental issues at the forefront of most industries, we need to think about what is Trimayr doing to reduce its carbon footprint. How could it reduce all of these things that we've just mentioned? How could it seek to have products that are perhaps from more sustainable manufacturers? Is there a way of introducing a washing system in salon that reduces water usage? Again, all proposals that could be put in an exam question, because then that opens up questions about project management of these new washing stations, communication to customers, perhaps, also accounting for the investment in these washing stations and how they would be accounted for. So thinking about sustainability from its own perspective, but then thinking about proposals in the exam to improve Trimayr's carbon footprint and how those projects could then be tested in many ways. I made a little point, which I think is important in terms of customer expectations and customer conflict and complaints, which is treatments must be properly explained accurately to customers. If, for example, we say we are going to apply a treatment to straighten hair, if that only lasts for 4 weeks, we need to explain that. Because if a customer expects that straightening process to then create straight hair for 6 months and it doesn't, that will create customer dissatisfaction. It will create word of mouth, social media, and that will damage the brand. So we have to make sure that our staff, again, are very well trained and are actually explaining to customers the nature of these treatments. Now, so many of these services to me say specialists. They say time and P2 pricing considerations. How would we set a price considering the specialist staff we might need, the time required for each of these different services, the products that we are needing to use in these services, and also, of course, competitor pricing, because in a high street where there is a salon of Trimayr, there could be another 6 other competing salons. So pricing considerations often tested, and these, I think, are some things that we would need to consider. Of course, when we think about time required for different services, and there are lots of different services, and the nature of the specialists we require, and of course, more specialist hairdressers will no doubt, if they are employed, they will be paid more than the lower qualified hairdressers. Activity-based costing and activity-based management is something that also springs to mind. Finally, I'm just mentioning there that customers are paying for relaxation as well as haircuts. And it's important to remember that it's an experience for a customer. In a service industry, the experience is very, very important. So having control of what the salon looks like, how the customers how the staff talk to the customers, how they manage the customer's experience, consistency of that experience, all really important, supporting perhaps a price that is being charged for a haircut. Finally, I've just mentioned on the right there, how does Trimayr practice sustainability? And when we look later on into the pre-scene, we actually aren't made aware, particularly, of what Trimayr does do. And I think it's quite possible that in an exam situation, we are told more about what Trimayr is practicing in terms of sustainability and environmental friendly policies and environmentally friendly sourcing of products, energy saving technologies, perhaps. Well, there could be a proposal to introduce something new here, which we might then be tested on in terms of investment for it, project management of it, communication of it to franchisees. So an area I think that is king in our pre-scene, we must not forget about.